So the reason why we're here today is because there's been so much in the news about migration of Syrians, refugees, but also internally displaced Syrians. According to the UN, half of all Syrians have either become refugees, become internally displaced, or have been killed in the war.
Or wounded.
Or wounded. So we're talking about half of the population. So we're going to talk about this in a global perspective, but we're also going to address American foreign policy.
The so-called Arab Spring, or the Arab Uprising, or the Arab Awakening. It started in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Yemen. Those leaders were overthrown. But in the case of Syria, just the Syrian president is hanging to the power. And Russia and Iran is supporting Bashar al-Assad. So he is surviving, and the struggle continues in Syria.
5 years?
Very short period. Yes, from the spring of 2011. So if you count that, so it's almost about 4 years. So in the span of 4 years, this happened. And the carnage still continues. Refugees. It's not only the Syrian refugees now flooding the gates of the European countries.
That's a good point. It's
yes,
not just Syrians.
It's not just Syrians.
Right.
They're Libyans, they're Iraqis. And I have just read an article today that after Syrians, Afghans are the largest group. So it's almost about 50,000 of them are trying to get from Afghanistan to Iran, from Iran to Turkey, from Turkey to the Greek islands, and from there to the European countries. So Afghans are forming about almost second largest group after the Syrians in this refugee problem, which the Europe is facing now. And one of the a group of Syrian refugees were interviewed. They were from Aleppo, about 24 of them.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that that even some of them are now Egyptians. They are saying that we are Syrians. So it's happening. Just like the Afghan refugees who came to the United States and went to Australia and European countries, there were many Pakistanis who wanted to get out of their countries. They speak the same language as Afghans do, so that's either Pashto or Dari. There were some Iranians too who wanted to get out of Iran because of the revolution in Iran since 1979. So the people who are not feeling comfortable in their own countries, and especially now, in the case of Iraq and Syria, in Libya, which it's really hot war going on there.
Yeah.
Sort of civil war. It is not a civil war, it's a proxy war now in Syria, because one difference between what was happening in Afghanistan and Syria is that in the case of Afghanistan, when the Afghan resistant forces at that time they were called Mujahideen, they were supported by Americans, they were supported by Europeans, and the Afghan resistant forces against the Soviet Union invasion were supported by these Arab Gulf countries. But in the case of the Syrians and Iraqis, resistant forces, the people who are fighting against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, his opposition is not helped as the Afghan resistance was helped by outsiders. But the government of Syria is strongly supported by Russia and by Iran. So these two countries, Russia and Iran, is supporting Bashar al-Assad and his government, the Alawite-dominated government, which is sustaining itself.
Apparently, Russia is actually arming.
Yeah, the news is that they're sending
Bashar al-Assad's forces.
Yeah,
that's a recent development. I don't really know what the nature of their relationship with Iran is, but there's the Shia identity that is a basis for some relationship.
Yes, in the case of because Iran is, there are 4 Muslim majority countries. Altogether, there are 57 Muslim majority countries. Of the 57, 4 of them have Shia majority. One is Iran, which has a Shia majority, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bahrain. In all other countries, Sunnis have the majority. In Syria, the majority of the Syrians are Sunni Muslims, and a minority, about 11-12%, are the Alawite Shiites. They are Shiites, but they are not the same branch of Shiites as Iranians are. Iranians are the Twelver Shiites, or Asna Ashari in Arabic, are the Imami Shiites, are the Jafari Shiites. But the Bashar al-Assad and his family and his father and his whole top military officers in Syria and the government officials, they're Alawite. It's a branch of the Shiites, not exactly the same group of, but still, since they are Shiites, the Iranian Shia establishment, Ayatollahs in Iran, are very supportive of Bashar al-Assad. Well, another important point is that this Arab uprising, which started in December of 2010 and spread in the spring of 2011 to Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, and Egypt, one of the reasons was that in all these countries, their dictators were in control for a very long period of time. Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafiz al-Assad, and Bashar al-Assad combined, they have been ruling Syria for about 45 years, because Hafiz al-Assad came to power in a coup in 1970. So since 1970, this father and son dynasty has been the rulers of Syria. In the case of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was in Egypt after the death of Anwar al-Sadat in 1981. So from 1981 to his removal to 3 years ago, so he was in power for about 30 years. Zainul Abidin Ali in Tunisia, he was in control for about almost 30 years. Abdullah Saleh in Yemen, another one for also about 29-30 years. So this is what these, in the Arab uprisings against these kind of dictatorial authoritarian regimes perpetuating themselves for almost decades in these countries. So the new generation in all these countries have access to social media, to internet and Facebook and cell phones. So these uprisings in these countries usually mainly by younger group, but these European countries are feeling now the heat of especially this ISIL, this Islamic State, terrorist groups which are creating problems in many of these European countries.
Yeah.
These are so sleeper cells in those countries.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of fear that some of these people that were coming to Europe, or they will eventually come to the United States. Among them, there will be some sort of members of either Al Qaeda or the Islamic State.
Right.
So that's one of the fears. But I think the United States has a mechanism to really purge those people who are not desirable somehow. So on the one hand, there is this fear everyone has that they do not want terrorists to sneak to their countries. But at the same time, in some cases, it's probably overreaction that tons of those ISIL people may come among them. So I think countries such as the United States, they have this firewalls in different places to prevent terrorists from coming to the United States.
There's the, what is it called, like the immigration service? There's a specific governmental department INS, I think. Immigration
Immigration and
Naturalization.
Naturalization Services. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So,
No, it is CIA, FBI, and others. So they're really watching what is happening. The Homeland Security, for example, ports and airports. So there is a thorough search going on. They look at the background of the people that who are. Um, it's not as easy. In many cases, it would be much easier to either use Canada or Mexico to sneak through the borders and fences and that kind of thing. So there is also this possibility. This possibility exists that some of these terrorists may come to these Latin American countries and from there to Mexico, and from Mexico, these coyotes will bring them to the United States. But statistically, as of yet, very few of them have been really determined that they have come through Mexico. There were in the United States some Somalians that who came here as refugees, and some of their kids were radicalized. They went back. There were one or two Pakistanis. There was even an Afghan by the name of Zazi in Colorado. I think it was in Denver, Colorado, somewhere. So there were some of these
the kids got
refugees. Yeah,
radicalized.
these refugees came here, and their children somehow were radicalized by
Online.
radicalized by some radical groups from outside the country.
So I just made our two guest presenters. So if you have questions and you're able to get audio, go ahead and ask, or you can chat, or make yourself known.